data backup and recovery procedures, it's not that complicated. There's a lot going on. We got to make it all work together, but let's break it down. The process is very simple. You've got data, systems, and configurations that you need copies of all that stuff. Now you're going to have a working set that you're working on right now, and they're going to make a copy of it. Now, is it a full copy? Is it a differential? Is it an incremental? It doesn't matter. You're going to make a copy, okay? You're going to make a copy of the changes. And you're going to repeat this copy process until your local storage is full. You'll do some optimization techniques to go ahead and deduplicate that, and you'll do incrementals and all those kinds of things. But basically, you're going to fill out your local storage, and then you're going to start recycling that storage space over time. Now, you could repeat your copies to the cloud instead of locally, but then you've got to upgrade your payment and your subscription. So you're making copies, right? Somebody comes along and says, this is our data retention policy. That backup policy better meet that number of copies that you have. Simple as that. And that backup policy could be very complicated and could be integrated into your environment, and I hope it is. Now, to protect those copies, the general way that you protect them is through encryption. But now that means that you've got to do key management, because those encryption keys shouldn't be the same for every single one of your backups. Now let's switch gears here and talk about needing a copy, okay? Some sort of data loss happens, and recognize that. So we've got this working copy right here, and right before that, we made a copy. How close to the changes are there? What are the deltas in there? There's going to be a gap between the working set and the time of the copy. And some people say, okay, well, we can't have too big of a gap. That will define your recovery point objective. We'll talk about that later on. But there's going to be a gap there. You're going to have some data loss. It's okay. And so you need a copy, you restore a copy. Everything's wonderful because something happened. It wasn't a big deal. But let's talk about the thing that happens. There's a failure. And that failure comes in a couple of different flavors. The user goes, oh, I deleted my file. I need another copy. So the user has corrupted the working set or has deleted a file by mistake. Doesn't really matter. It could be that an attacker corrupts our working set. Now they come in and they're evil and they corrupt our working set. They could also corrupt our previous working set. And that means that if we were to restore that data that was corrupted, we can reintroduce that vulnerability that the adversary injected into our rebuilt environment. Not so good there. So now what we need as a control is we need built-in malware detection in our restoration process. Okay. Now there is one other thing. Ransomware, by another name, is the attacker collects a working set or copy. They could collect directly from the working set, or they could collect a copy, like grabbing one of your backups. But if your backup's encrypted and your keys are protected, then they really can't get your backups, but they'll go after your working set. Now, there are some complexities to our working sets, and there are complex working sets out there that we need to consider for this. The first is in our cloud environment. If you're purchasing from one of the major vendors out there, they have this thing called function as a service, and they do all the backup and all the restore of your data, and they protect it until you want to leave. And then they say, okay, well, here's your copy of the data, but it's not organized in any way. We're just going to dump it out in one big blob. Or software as a service. Now, I know that a lot of us are purchasing a lot of software as a service, and if that vendor doesn't have good backup and restore process in place, well, then we lose our data again. So we're going to have to figure out some ways for third-party supply chain management to be addressed in this. Next is our virtual environments. We're going to modify data blocks and not entire files, because remember, now this virtual machine is a file. it's a big file and it's got composed of different parts inside of it. So we don't want to try and, make a copy of the entire file every single time it changes, because the operating system is running. It's continually changing. Also, if we're running multiple virtual machines of the same flavor and same type on the same infrastructure, we don't need all of the operating system files within that. And in fact, we can deduplicate that information while it's running, so that also helps us with our backing up. We can also do compression on those files that aren't used that often, again, so that we can reduce our overall copy cost, if you will. Then we get into devices. How are you going to back up your firewall configuration? Because you have to, because you might need to restore it. So now you got to figure out that agent process. You got to figure out that. So it's an easy thing to say. It's a difficult thing to do. Remember, in ransomware protection, we want to combine our backing up, our copies, with monitoring, live monitoring, real-time protection. It should automatically block suspicious activities, and the suspicious activities within our copies, our backup, and our restore process. So it should be watching that process as it goes along. Now, we need a good backup strategy, and that starts with defining the recovery objectives. And our solution should be simple, but it should be complete. And our data should be safe. Now, this fits into a larger process within our organization. It would be called contingency planning. And I'm going to point to it right inside of here. So here's the general on contingency planning. And by the way, I have a whole recording on contingency planning out there. So your formal contingency plans include addressing the backup and retention. That was the thing that we just talked about. Selecting alternate site strategies where our backups may be held. Defining emergency response actions, who can restore these things. Outline our resumption process, restore them where and to what. And determine the backup initiation steps. This would be maybe getting another copy. Now, we're going to have recovery documentation standards that are going to be in place. We need a list of how this thing gets done. You should maintain a hard copy of your plans off-site. There are digital ways to do this, but always have a physically printed one, usually in the place that you're going to restore to. The reason why we restrict plan distribution is we only divulge it when it's necessary, so that our adversaries, they don't figure out where our backups are, what we use for backups, and then start investigating how to break in that way. And the ransomware gets in if they get those plans. We're going to label it for official use, and we're going to grant specific access rights to it, and we're going to store application documentation off-site. That's the way that we build the plan, and we're going to talk more about how we get into the deep components of that next. I'd like to talk a little AI with you. Data backup and recovery hasn't really hit yet, but let's pretend that you need help. You're in the middle of, oh my God, I need some help. I'm panicking. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's get to the internet and let's get to my favorite AI, and we're going to build a prompt to take care of this. Well, if you're setting up a prompt for yourself, make sure that the prompt itself is requiring clarification when necessary, because you might be in a rush. And set it up so that it always replies with step-by-step information. Okay, now you need to be specific about all of the components of the system, and you may not be. You may forget things that you have in place, or it may not understand your customized system. What I strongly urge you to do is use your AI output as suggestions, as a back-of-the-napkin plan when you're in the middle of something and you don't have your business continuity plan and you don't have your playbook, your run book, the thing that tells you exactly how to go ahead and restore this thing, or let's say that that process doesn't work. You can take that process, by the way, if it's digital, and you can load it into the AI and say, this is my process, where am I going wrong? And it may give you information back, but only use it as a set of suggestions. You want to confirm all these actions and validate all of this information as you're going along, because hallucinations, they may happen. Now, let's switch to AI-driven insights for data backup and recovery. Where could the backup and recovery people, incorporate AI into what they're doing? And let's take a break here just for a second. Remember, AI relies on massive amounts of data. Your company and their backups is not massive amounts of data. Well, the data is, but the data about the data for the AI to do predictive things, that's not a massive amount of data. That's a little tiny bit of data. Now, there is one vendor out there that has been responsible about this. I didn't call out any of the other vendors for not doing it right, but I wanted to talk about Acronis for being patient about this and doing something smart. Here's what they said. Our product development team is working with and for our 21,000 partners to bring the most functional AI-powered use case to the managed service provider technicians in the field. That's a lot of data. 21,000 partners. Those 21,000 partners also have, customers below them. In theory, if the managed service providers and the customers bring all of their data together, they will get some AI insights that they otherwise would not have had. And that, I think, is a really good idea. For all of this stuff, when somebody comes along and say, I have AI-driven data backup and recovery tools for you, you need to do some vendor validation on this. I looked through about 20 different vendors, and what they said was, we've got this backup strategy here and all these different tools, and there's this little thing down here, and yes, we tick the box for AI. So really look at what the vendors are saying at that point. Don't let them go ahead and juice the price on you because they tagged it with AI. Now, what would we expect them to do? What were the good things that I heard from all of the vendors? So in our data backups, our copies that we're making, if our adversary injects themselves into our copies, we need to be able to identify clean points in that data. And we need to be able to validate those clean points. Now, that could be done with something other than AI, but AI may assist in this to say, here's what it looks like. We still have to say, okay, we're going to validate that. They could help us assemble uncorrupted versions. Again, I don't think AI is doing this kind of thing, but it may. And so I'm open to it. So I hope you'll join me for the rest of the presentation.